Hi, everyone. Hello, Framework family. My name is Kathe Petchel, and I'm Client Relations at Hinge Advisors. And I'm so glad to welcome you today to this short session. Honestly, we could talk for hours, but I'll try to keep it right at 30 minutes on how to analyze your staff turnover. And so the first thing we want to talk about is why we even care about staff turnover. And obviously, it's a huge issue right now where we're having so much trouble finding staff and keeping staff. And so staff turnover really matters. And so many times it seems like we're frustrated with our staff and we're kind of blaming our staff or, thinking it's on them. And I would put it to you that it's probably more on us than on them. And so it starts with finding the right staff and recruiting the right staff and then keeping them, training them, and onboarding. So today I want to talk a little bit about how to analyze your staff turnover. So I'm assuming that you've got your staff, they're great, they're doing a really good job, and then all of a sudden you get that resignation letter and you're just blown out of the water. You're shocked. You have no idea why they've left. And so I think there's some ways we can mitigate that and talk about it. So I love to just share. So on the staff turnover dilemma, what's different now and what's the same? And so if you have been in the industry for many, many years, you've sort of seen the way it ebbs and flows. Back when I started, staff turnover was not an issue. We were working more with boomers or Gen Ys. And now staff turnover is an absolute issue because the bulk of our employees, and in fact, the bulk of the workers in America are either Gen Zers or millennials. And that will continue to increase as the years go on. So as the greatest generation and the baby boomers start to retire or go into very part-time or consulting type situations, they will be leaving space open for the younger generation. And so what we know about the younger generation, especially the Gen Zers and the millennials, is they don't plan to stay in a business or a company as long as, say, a baby boomer did. And so that's something that's very different now. What's the same is people love children. We want to be with children. We want to grow families. Anyone that is in this industry is not necessarily, or actually not at all, in it for pay. They're in it for benefits that are soft. So benefits of inclusion, benefits of being part of something bigger, benefits that, I'm counted on, I matter. Those kind of softer benefits we know from the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic and research, for example, with the World Happiness Report, that inclusion really matters a lot. Staff want to be included, they want to be seen. And so that gives us a really good opportunity to help our staff and to help our leaders and directors really work on keeping staff stable. What can we learn from staff turnover? We can learn a lot about the way we're articulating our core values, about the way our company is perceived, and also the inner workings of our companies. When staff turnover happens in a particular age group, for instance, or staff turnover happens at a particular location, it's really an open book test. You get to see the data and see the stress and try to figure out and mitigate. So if, a particular room, there's certain rooms, I know I have 3 locations, and certain rooms just kind of eat teachers alive. There's a certain 2-year-old room at one of my schools, not all the 2-year-old rooms, that really it's just hard to keep a teacher. And so what can we do to change that? Can a teacher from a successful 2-year-old room come and train the new staff at the 2-year-old room that has a lot of turnover? There's a lot of strategies that could be very creative. So we can learn a lot about staff turnover, but what we do know is keeping good staff matters now more than ever. And we're paying a lot more than we did before. We're spending a lot more money in overtime right now. And as we come out of the pandemic, hopefully that will lessen. But I think with all the states raising the minimum wage, we're really in it for the long haul on figuring out how we can pay our staff well and add all the soft elements that matter to them, including inclusion, including the flexibility. The Gen Zers and the millennials want a lot of flexibility. If you look at a resume, it tells a story. And I would say the most important thing to look at on a resume in terms of turnover, not qualifications and not core value fit, but turnover, would be the length at which the candidate stayed at their other jobs. So if you look at maybe the last 4 or 5 years, and that's all you're going to have for a lot of, you're not even going to have that much for a Gen Zer, but you would for a millennial. Look at the average amount of time they stayed that's stated on their resume, and that is about how long you can expect them to stay with you. If you ask those open-ended questions at the beginning before you even hire them, how long do you plan to stay? And just have an open conversation and be willing to understand they're only maybe going to stay a year. Then your opportunity is to talk to the parents when you're introducing the staff member. We are so happy to add so-and-so to our team. So-and-so is in our town for just the next year. So happy to have her or him contribute to our school. And then you put it out there in the beginning so that everyone understands. So first thing I want you to do is think about how to calculate your staff turnover. This is a really fun exercise, and it's also a little stressful because it's not meant to make you feel bad about your company or your school or particularly good. It's just meant to give you data that you can make informed decisions. So what we want to do is at the end of the year W-4s, you want to know how many of those you have divided by the number of positions you have in your school. Don't get caught up in the exact numbers of maybe you've got a couple temps or those college kids that come in the summer. Really, I'm looking at the full-time positions you have. So if you have, for instance, 40 full-time positions, 25, let's go easy, let's go smaller, 25 full-time positions, and you've got 40 W-2s, you could throw out maybe the college, part-timers, or maybe the high school students that come in at the end of the day. We're looking for raw data on your full-time staff members. You're going to divide the number of positions by number of W-2s times 100, which will give you the turnover rate. So in my example of a school having 25 positions and 40 W-2s, 40 divided by the 25 is 1.6 times 100. We're doing math here because it's framework, y'all. 160% turnover. So that's a huge percent of turnover. And so that's a great conversation you're ready to have with your team. Our turnover is high. Then maybe go back to the year before and do the same exercise. Our turnover is better than the year before or worse than the year before. Right now, we're seeing a ton of turnover, and I'm not expecting it to change anytime soon until we're fully out of the pandemic, and also until we really raise those tuition rates and are able to keep really salaries very stable. We want to be really careful that we're not using grant funds and anything that is not sustainable to support our staff. Rather, we want to see tuition rates realistic to pay our staff what we need to pay them. Another tip on this would be that if you have multi-sites, as I said, looking at the positions, you can see a lot of maybe management and leadership deficiencies or strengths and utilize those with looking at a staff turnover. You can also look at your locations. If you've got 5 locations, which location had the better staff turnover rate and why? You could look at your leaders and your managers. Oh, new director. Of course, there's more staff turnover. The director is just coming in, not quite seasoned yet, and maybe had some bumps with the staff. Perhaps he or she wasn't as comfortable as a leader or as comfortable holding people accountable. So, there are many reasons why a staff would leave, but I would want you to look at your overall staff turnover number and then dive into it and see what else can you learn. So you will come away with some insights that can help you make an action plan. So if your turnover is a lot more than you want it to be, what would your action plan be? So we would start, and that's what we're going to get into in a minute. A pro tip on this would be to budget an extra $500 to $1,000 per person for actually recruiting and retaining. How could you spend a little extra money on retaining your staff? Is it growing their professional career with certifications? Do they need a CDA or some support on getting a college degree or an associate's degree? What can you do to help them grow their career? Looking at a dream manager of what skills do you want them to acquire? One thing I tell my staff when I hire them is, we want you to leave us whenever that is, and we hope you will be with us for a very long time, but whenever that is, a stronger employee with stronger skills. And we want to be able to write a great reference for you and support you on your journey. We're happy you're here, and we want to grow you. So we can grow them with their work ethic. We can grow them with their skills. Obviously, maybe they need behavior management, which is a really normal skill, or helping children self-regulate is a little bit better of a way to say it, I think. That's a skill that many newbies in the teaching profession need to work on. And so maybe there's conscious discipline that you could send them to the course on conscious discipline. Conferences are a great way to really set someone apart in a leadership track or a development track as a professional. I love this because everyone's different, and we're working with human beings. We're working with sweet pea little children, and we're working with their parents, and then we're working with our staff. So all of the groups we work with, all of our stakeholders, are nurtured and communicated with and educated one way or the other, including and especially the parents, so they understand what we're doing. When we're talking to parents about our staff turnover, being really transparent is very helpful. And when you're looking at growing your team, the second you think you've got everybody hired is the second you're making a mistake. You need to be always hiring, always finding a seat on the bus for those good candidates, because they're not coming along as fast and furious as they used to. And there's a lot of opportunities. I like to say that a lot of your really good candidates are working for a competitor right now. So be really open to recruiting from other programs, doing very generous bonuses for referrals for your staff. When your parents are referring staff, maybe they were at another location or center, not yours, a competitor's, and they can refer or recruit someone for you. All of that is really helpful. The anecdotal information I want you to track, or at least kind of put in the back of your mind, so that you know when you need to stay very connected with your staff, which is of course all the time, but in general, time of year. Track time of year. If you're looking at resignations, when do you lose a lot of staff? I'm in a college town, and there's a military group here. And so I know starting in March, I get a lot of parent disenrollments. And I also get, because they're on a base and they're moving on to their next base, their next orders. That also happens with staff. What time of year? Of course, end of the school year, May, June. So the staff that want to stay home with their school age kids might be resigning, maybe only temporarily. You've got your college students, or we're in a university town with a medical hospital. So if I hire medical students' spouses, they're going to leave at a certain time of the year. So really track that time of year. Last August, I don't know about you all, but last August was very rough. It was like Groundhog Day every day. Needing staff having COVID, staff, not coming to work, needing staff. I was actually in a classroom myself. So that time of the year, so we've all said as a team, we are never living another August again. We're going to hire extra staff for August. And it makes sense. People are finishing their last vacations. The unexpected things happen with staff. They're looking for other jobs or possibly getting pulled into the school system. The public school system is making last minute hires. So time of year is critical to know when you've got a lot of staff turnover. Same with generational differences. So track that the Gen Zers, you've got to be Johnny on the spot with your Gen Zers. They like texting, instead of making a phone call, because most people are not answering their cell phones now unless they recognize the number. You're going to want to text your Gen Z. So a generational difference of them leaving is really watching what your different generations are doing in terms of leaving. Typically, a boomer will write a letter and they'll print it off and put it in an envelope. A Gen Zer won't do that. A millennial will maybe not likely do that. They'll probably text you. Hopefully they don't no-show. Milestone events is a really interesting one to track. When people are getting ready to have a milestone birthday, so for a Gen Zer, it would be they're turning 21, or they're turning 25, or they're getting married, or they're having their first baby. Those kind of milestone events are triggers for them to look at their life and think, what am I doing wrong? And what could I do right? Or do I like where I am in my life right now? So those are really interesting times. For your older staff turning 30, 40, 50, those are big red flags of, oh, it's a time when we reassess. I'll tell you one that I find that I don't usually talk about, but when they're coming back from vacation, I can't tell you, I've tracked this. I get more resignations when they come back from vacation. And it makes me not want to give them vacations, of course, but that's not realistic and certainly not within my core value. Everyone needs a break, but coming back from vacation. So what can you do in that situation? You can make sure that you're really connecting before vacation and after. If they're due for a raise, make sure it's happening before vacation, because what happens is they relax at the beach or wherever they are with their family, and they start to think, what if, or they do their dreaming. And so milestone vacations. And the other milestone is class reunions. And so if you're ready to give them a leadership position, do it before their class reunion, because they want to go to their class reunion and maybe not say, I'm a toddler teacher. And no one should ever be ashamed of being a teacher, but if you go to your class reunion and you don't feel like the hot shot, that makes a difference. So, sort of that, that being really open with your team about how much they're valued before any milestones happen. Family and personal situations, that's a really obvious one you want to track. Someone's ill in the family. If their last child's going off to college and now they're, ready to, have more time to themselves, or even more interesting, the last child graduated from college and now they don't have to pay for college. So really looking at that, and then obviously mental and physical health. So here's how I want you to analyze your staff. And so the premise here, and I developed this myself, so I would love feedback always. The premise is looking at 4 core areas and looking at whose responsibility they are. Now, of course, if you're an owner like I am or a longtime leader, we know it really always comes back to us. But in terms of this conversation, we're going to do a chart, which you'll be able to scroll down in this presentation and print the chart off. But we're going to look at core values and culture fit, the education and experience the candidate came in with to begin with. In other words, should they have even been hired on these 2 areas, core value, culture fit, education and experience? And then what have we done? Have we engaged them initially really well? Or are we throwing them in a classroom? We're all throwing people in a classroom way more than we want to. And I would also say that versus 2019 and prior, we're bringing on staff that need much more training and engagement. they've got tons of potential and they might be really, really good employees in a couple years, great teachers and contribute heavily to our programs. But initially, they need a lot more time, that eyeball to eyeball, that connection time. And then how are we continuing to mentor and support them? And that's really also on us. All of this seems so daunting, but stepping back and understanding, okay, staff turnover, and here's what I really need to focus on. I need to focus on my Gen Zers and engaging and keeping them. I need to focus on a particular classroom or age group, a particular school, and then looking and having an honest conversation with your team, possibly at a retreat or a situation where there's time to really process and brainstorm would be really helpful. Oh, I've got a question. What are your thoughts? Oh, I love this question. Someone asked, what are your thoughts on not counting in W-2s of individuals who didn't make it any more, oh, it's Michelle Lank, any more than 2 weeks? Or do you count all the W-2s? Oh, Michelle, thank you. I meant to say this. I personally think you should not count anyone. This is what I'm saying. Anyone that hasn't made it past probation. My probation is 3 months. When we started doing this as a team, once they're fully onboarded and trained, you would expect they're going to stay. So after a certain amount of time, I suggested to my team after probation. We ended up saying after a month because we thought we really wanted harder core numbers. But I love that question and I totally agree. So I'll throw out anyone that was sort of like just a very part-time. And I will also throw out anyone that, we're making a hire that we're taking a chance on. We really need to fill that seat right now, but we're not sure. And what we don't want to do is keep someone that we feel is not going to make it or could possibly be, a terrible culture fit or also a not safe for children. So I think we actually should be rewarded in a way, according to the data, for realizing that and not be discouraged from that. So yes, I agree with you completely about that. And that's a great question. Thank you for that. So the worksheet looks like this, and you can scroll down. So what I want you to do is plug in the last 5 staff you've left. And like Michelle suggested, the one-off staff that made it 2 weeks and didn't come back after their lunch break, just call it a day and don't worry about that one. We really want to dig into what we could do better, So you're going to look and put your last 5 staff, and I'm just going to give you a minute to fill those names in. And if you're doing this with a coworker or several directors, you would each do your own school. And then if you're a leader, maybe you do your last 5 directors. Maybe you're having trouble keeping directors, or your last 5, you could do auxiliary staff. Like, what are we doing wrong about keeping maintenance people? You could really take this and make it very creative for yourself, for what you want to look at. So you're listing your last 5 staff, and then you're writing, you know what your core values are, and you know what your culture is. So who is responsible for making sure they understand and share the core values and culture? The person that's hiring them, the person that wrote the ads, the person that initially had conversations or Zoomed with them, the person that checked their social media. So in this case, it could be multiple people. So we want to check and make sure if the core value didn't fit or the culture was not a fit, we want to know before we hire them, not later. So that's on them in terms of them having the right core value or culture fit, but it's on us to discover it. So how do we discover it? And I know you all have a million ways. This group is very savvy and very articulate about what exactly they need for their school. But I would suggest that you make sure that it's a core value and culture fit using all of your social media. If you're doing a hiring ad on your Facebook and you're, putting it on signs or flyers in your community, or you're putting it on yard signs or your Instagram and so on. You want to make sure that you're putting out your core values or your culture, looking for staff to, we're growing. We want to include, new ideas and creative teachers. You want to make sure you're articulating that, sort of the law of attraction. If I'm trying to attract within my core values, how will they even know what they are if I don't articulate it? So you want to do that check. So when you put the name, then you're going to say, yes, they were a core value fit, or no, they were not. And so you'll have an aha by the time you finish with 5. Of course, you could go much deeper and do 10, or you could do, the last 50, however you want. Now you go to the education and experience. As I said earlier, that one's a harder one. We are now hiring people with less education and saying, we'll train you. We'll train the right candidate if they're a culture fit, or less experience. They're can't be alone with children. They've got to have lots of supervision, but we're willing to take a chance on staff that, 4 years ago, I would never have even called. I wouldn't have even called to interview them. And now I'm, having to, be much more open-minded. I'm being much more open-minded about tattoos and piercings and dress code, and and that's great. I think that shows that an owner is willing to be really flexible within reason. We're not going to be willing to hire staff that have any kind of criminal record or any kind of negative, really negative social media posts. So were they a fit with education and experience? Yes or no. You could write a few notes in, and then again, you're analyzing. The next piece is the initial engagement. So did we initially engage them, or did we throw them in a room? So you're going to write notes about that. You could just do quick bullet points. You could take this doc, make it your own, and make it longer. But how do you initially engage? Did they get that welcome gift or thank you for interviewing? How great is it if they leave with something branded by you just from an interview? So how did you engage? And then the continuous mentoring. So that would include, did I engage with them in terms of, having a mentor for them, in terms of engaging with the rest of the staff? Did they feel like they knew where they could go eat lunch? Or do they, I just heard a story a couple of weeks ago about a new staff member that quit because no one invited her to lunch, or she didn't feel included in the teacher break lounge. That's an awful reason to lose someone. And, that shows a lot about, this person wanted to be a part of the group, and, there's little clicks, and we know that. Again, I'll reiterate that if you'd like to download this, you just scroll down to the bottom. So continuous mentoring, did we do that? The initial engagement, did we do that? And could we have done better? What could we have done better? And then obviously the last thing would be, how do we say goodbye? And do we say goodbye with a lot of grace, or do we just let them go and are angry? If they leave, it's still an opportunity to get information. Hey, how did we do? Help me understand why this didn't end up being a fit. Sometimes it's going to be that they weren't transparent, and sometimes it's going to be that we're too rushed, or we didn't take the time, or maybe they weren't a fit in the classroom, or we had them in the wrong room. But having the hardcore data and maybe keeping this and then doing it every time is going to give you a lot of insights. I'm going to pop into the chat box. We had 2 who gave notice after their classroom quarantined. They were used to being home. Yep. That's exactly what happens. And so that's tough. And so that would be a question we could ask when we're doing initial interviewing. Tell me about how you've weathered COVID. Tell me, if we quarantine our classroom, tell me what, let me tell you our process on that. So if they have the heads up ahead of time, that could mitigate it. Who knows? And that's all we have time for today, but I really appreciate everyone being here and your attention and attendance. I'm always happy to answer any questions, and all the information about reaching me is in our website and on this document. Thank you, everyone.